Andy, you in your lecture you juxtaposed theology and theological. What do you mean when you say we should make a theological turn to youth ministry?
Yeah, it's a terrible academic thing to do. Like take two words that are essentially seem the same and then try to blow up completely different perspectives out of those the distinction of these two words. So I did try to do that. I tried to say that the theological turn was not the theology turn, but it was actually the theological turn. And it's actually something that I stole from Mark Taylor, who teaches at Princeton, and he wrote a little book called, I think it's called Theological and the Political. And his basic point was in that book, and I've taken it in a different direction, but his basic point was that theology tends to be guild work, like done in academy. But he was really looking at how the theological happens in neighborhoods, prisons, like theological work that's trying to make sense of who God is next to lived experience actually happens. And I think he was really trying to push, and I think I really agree with this, that theology has tended to be co-opted for internal academic conversations, which only gets us really stuck in an echo chamber, which I think is one of the really beautiful things that this project across this project on joy and human flourishing is trying to break open, which is really quite beautiful. So what I'm trying to do in youth ministry and think have learned is really attending to young people's experience as the inroads into these big questions about God, about what it means to be human, about what it means to have an experience of salvation. Like those, to really get into those experiences, not just to try to get kids to correlate to some kind of doctrinal system, but to actually help those doctrines and those theological and the theological tradition as a whole be lived out in and through their experience. So it's a very practical theology move, trying to move into thinking about God and God's action through lived and concrete experience. But I think that becomes really essential, and I think youth ministry becomes a really interesting place for that to happen, to wrestle with that. There's just a lot of, I think, really generative freedom in youth ministry to try to ask those big questions about what it means to be human, about how God might encounter us, and things like that. So at its base level, to take the theological as opposed to theology is really to attend to lived human experience. And for me, I've been really trying to work this idea of ministry as this kind of broader category that actually connects to God's own being, that God is a minister, that God comes into the world, that God acts in the world as one who liberates and reconciles and redeems, as a minister that comes in as a humble minister in many ways. And I think that's the title of the lecture was about kenosis, and I think that's part of what I mean by kenosis, is this sense that this God is a God who humbles God's self to choose to interact with the world as a ministering God, as a God who bears and shares in, and is willing to be weak for the sake of participation in and through, and trying to think about how youth ministry reflects on that and how youth ministry even embodies that.